Welcome to the captivating realm of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our exciting new stories. Enjoy the journey.
Trey Gordon's eyes flew open, his head throbbing with a deep ache. Disoriented, he blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of his surroundings. The acrid scent of smoke and burnt electronics filled the air, causing him to cough. As his vision cleared, he found himself still strapped into the pilot's seat of his small smuggling ship, now a wreck of twisted metal. With a muttered curse, he struggled with the safety harness until the buckle finally released, allowing him to stumble out of the seat, barely keeping his balance on the slanted floor. Moving towards the back of the ship, Trey took in the extensive damage. It was bad. The hull was breached in multiple spots, and most systems were down. Reaching the cargo hold, he felt a surge of relief. At least his valuable contraband was intact. It wouldn't do him much good, though, if he couldn't get off this planet. He grabbed his emergency pack and made his way to the exit hatch, which, fortunately, was still functional. As the door slid open with a hiss, a wave of humid air and alien sounds assaulted his senses. Stepping out, Trey felt his boots sink slightly into soft earth as he surveyed his surroundings. He was on the edge of a dense jungle, with trees towering above him and leaves larger than he'd ever seen. Colorful birds flitted through the branches, their calls echoing in the thick canopy. "Where am I?" he muttered, pulling out his navigation computer. The device sparked, then died, clearly damaged in the crash. Frustrated, he tossed it aside. With no working navigation, he had no idea where he was, let alone how to call for help. Taking stock of his gear, Trey found he had his blaster, a few days of rations, and some basic survival equipment. It would have to be enough. He needed to find water and set up shelter before nightfall. As he began to explore, he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling of being watched. Over the following days, Trey adjusted to his new environment. He managed to set up a basic camp near the crash site, using parts of the ship and materials he found in the jungle. He discovered a freshwater stream nearby and even learned to set traps for local wildlife. Despite finding some level of comfort, the feeling of being watched never left him. He'd seen signs of intelligent life, arranged stones, paths that looked purposeful, but he hadn't encountered anyone yet. One night, as Trey checked his traps under the dim light of the planet's 3 moons, he froze. Caught in one of his snares was a young woman, not an animal. Her skin had a faint greenish hue, and her long blonde hair was tangled with leaves. She looked at him with a mix of fear and defiance, clearly expecting hostility. Trey's mind raced. He'd prepared for alien creatures, even dangerous ones, but this was something entirely different. Lowering his weapon, he tried to seem non-threatening. "Hey," he said gently, raising his empty hands, "I'm not going to hurt you. Let me help you out of that trap." The woman's eyes widened slightly, though she remained wary as he approached. He carefully loosened the snare, freeing her leg. As soon as she was released, she backed away, keeping her distance. Trey reached for his canteen. "Here," he offered, holding it out. "Water. You must be thirsty." She hesitated, then took the canteen, sniffing it before taking a small sip. Finding it safe, she drank deeply. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying an unfamiliar accent. "I am Cara." "Trey Gordon," he replied, still somewhat taken aback. "What are you doing out here alone?" Her gaze dropped. "I am banished," she said softly. "I broke the ancient traditions of my people and was exiled to wander the jungle alone." Trey felt a pang of sympathy. "That's harsh," he replied. "Look, it's dangerous out here. Why don't you come back to my camp? It's safer than being out in the open." She studied him, a mixture of hope and caution in her eyes. "You would do this for me, a stranger?" "We're both alone on this planet," he shrugged. "Might as well stick together." To his surprise, Cara dropped to one knee. "Then I, Cara of the Sylvan, vow to tie my fate to yours, Trey Gordon. I will aid you in any way I can, even to becoming the mother of your children, if you wish." Trey blinked, startled by her intensity. "Whoa, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's just focus on helping each other survive, all right?" She nodded, standing. "As you wish. Lead the way to your camp, Trey Gordon." As they walked back, Cara opened up about her situation. "I was to be married to the chief's son," she explained, "but I refused. I don't love him, and I believe everyone should have the freedom to choose their own path. For this, I was cast out." Trey whistled. "That's tough. No second chances?" She shook her head. Our traditions are unyielding. Breaking them brings chaos, or so the elders believe. They arrived at his camp, and Trey showed her around. It wasn't much, just a makeshift shelter from the ship's wreckage, a fire pit, and some basic supplies. It's not fancy, Trey said, smiling, but it's home, for now. Cara looked around in awe. This is impressive, she said. You've done well to survive here alone. He shrugged. I've learned a few things over the years, but you probably know more about this jungle than I do. Maybe we can teach each other. Thus began an unlikely partnership. Over the next few days, Cara showed Trey which plants were safe to eat, how to find hidden water, and ways to avoid dangerous creatures. In return, Trey shared his knowledge of technology, showing her how to use tools he'd salvaged. As they worked together, a friendship began to grow. Trey admired Cara's curiosity and resilience, while she appreciated his resourcefulness and kindness. They spent evenings by the fire, sharing stories of their different lives. So you're a smuggler? Cara asked one night, her eyes wide with interest. Trey grinned sheepishly. Yeah, not exactly the most respectable job, I know. But it pays the bills and lets me see the galaxy. Cara leaned forward, intrigued. Traveling the stars, seeing new worlds, that must be incredible. It has its moments, Trey admitted, but it can be lonely too. What about you? What was your life like before? Cara's face softened. I was training to be a healer, she said. I loved learning about the plants and creatures of my world. But as the chief's son's betrothed, I was expected to give it up for more traditional roles. Trey frowned. That doesn't sound fair. She shrugged. It was our way. Or, it was. Now I'm not sure what my future holds. Trey took her hand gently. We'll figure it out together, he said. Their quiet moment was interrupted by a sudden rustling in the nearby bushes. Trey jumped up, blaster ready. Cara stood beside him, eyes alert. What is it? She whispered. Just then the bushes parted, and several figures emerged from the shadows, tall, muscular humanoids with greenish skin, just like Cara's. Their bodies were covered in intricate armor crafted from bones and animal scales, each holding a spear or bow aimed directly at Trey and Cara. Cara gasped, her face paling. No, she whispered. They found me. The leader, a towering warrior with elaborate facial markings, stepped forward and narrowed his eyes at Cara. Exile, he sneered. You dare to linger so close to our lands? Keeping his blaster trained on the leader, Trey's mind raced. Who are these guys? He asked Cara quietly. My tribe, she answered, her voice trembling. The Sylvan warriors. They've come to enforce my banishment. The leader's gaze shifted to Trey, his expression filled with curiosity and disgust. What sort of creature are you, outsider? You carry strange metals and hail from foreign lands. Despite the tension, Trey managed a cocky grin. Name's Trey Gordon. Just a guy trying to survive on this lovely planet. No need for trouble. The warrior's lip curled. There is already trouble. The exile must face her punishment. Stand aside, outsider, or face our wrath. Cara stepped forward, her chin lifted defiantly. I've done nothing wrong, Zoran. Our ways are outdated and cruel. I only want the freedom to choose my own path. Zoran's face hardened. Your words are poison, Cara. You had a choice, return and face judgment, or accept exile. You've clearly made your decision. Trey tightened his grip on his blaster and glanced at Cara, seeing the fear and determination in her eyes. Making a quick decision, he said to Zoran, Sorry, but the lady's with me now. You want her? You'll have to go through me first. Trey opened fire, sending energy bolts toward the Sylvan warriors, forcing them to dive for cover. Run, he shouted, grabbing Cara's hand and pulling her toward the jungle. They crashed through the underbrush, the warriors' angry shouts echoing behind them. Trey's heart pounded as he ducked branches and leapt over fallen logs, while Cara guided them on the safest paths. An arrow whizzed past Trey's ear, embedding in a nearby tree trunk. They're catching up, he panted. Cara scanned for an escape route. This way, she cried, veering left. Trey followed, trusting her instincts. They burst into a clearing, only to find themselves at the edge of a steep ravine with a raging river below. Now what? He asked, hearing the warrior's footsteps approaching fast. Cara's eyes were wide with fear, but set with determination. We jump? Trey stared at her, stunned. Are you crazy? That fall could kill us. They definitely will if we stay, she retorted. She grabbed his hand. Trust me. Before Trey could argue, she pulled him toward the edge, sharing a look of fear and determination. They leaped just as the warriors entered the clearing. The fall seemed endless as they plummeted toward the churning water below. At the last moment, Cara positioned their bodies in a way he didn't understand. They hit the water with a tremendous splash, the impact knocking the wind from Trey. Disoriented in the swirling current, Trey's lungs burned. Just as panic set in, he felt Cara's grip on his arm, pulling him up. They broke the surface, gasping for air as the current swept them downstream, distancing them from their pursuers. Trey could hear the frustrated shouts of the warriors growing fainter. "Hold on," Cara yelled over the roar. "There's a calmer stretch ahead." True to her word, the river soon widened and slowed. With their last strength, they swam to shore, collapsing on the muddy bank. After catching their breath, Trey looked at Cara with awe and gratitude. "That was incredible," he panted. "How did you know we'd survive the fall?" Cara sat up, wringing water from her long hair. "The river is sacred to my people. We learn its ways from childhood. I knew the depth was enough to break our fall." Trey chuckled, shaking his head. "Remind me never to doubt you again." As the adrenaline faded, they realized their situation. Soaked, weaponless, and far from Trey's camp, night was falling, and predators would soon be out. "We need to find shelter," Cara said, scanning the dark forest. "There's a cave system nearby. We should be safe there for the night." Trey nodded. "Lead the way." They made their way through the jungle, Cara's knowledge of the terrain invaluable. The caves she'd mentioned were a network of caverns carved into a hillside, and they picked one with a narrow entrance, easy to defend if necessary. As they settled in for the night, Trey gathered dry leaves and branches to make a small fire, grateful for the warmth after their plunge into the river. "So," Trey said, breaking the silence, "I guess we're fugitives now, huh?" Cara nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this, Trey. You risked everything for me, and you barely know me." Trey shrugged, giving her a small smile. "Hey, what are friends for? Besides, I was already stranded on an alien planet. Might as well add running from warriors to the list." From angry warriors to the list of adventures, his attempt at humor drew a quiet laugh from Cara. "You are unlike anyone I've ever met, Trey Gordon." "I'll take that as a compliment," he replied with a wink. Then, growing serious, he asked, "What do we do now? Your people aren't going to give up easily, are they?" Cara shook her head, her expression grim. "No, they won't. Zoran, the warrior leader, is particularly stubborn. He sees my defiance as a threat to the entire tribe's way of life." Trey frowned, poking at the fire with a stick. "There's got to be a way to reason with them, make them see that change isn't always a bad thing." "Perhaps," Cara said, though she didn't sound convinced. "But first, we need to survive. The jungle is dangerous enough without my people hunting us." They fell into contemplative silence, each lost in thought as the fire crackled and the sounds of the night jungle filtered into their small sanctuary. Trey found himself studying Cara's profile in the flickering firelight. Her green-tinged skin seemed to glow, and her eyes reflected a depth of wisdom and strength. "Cara," he said softly, drawing her attention, "I want you to know I don't regret helping you. Whatever happens, we're in this together now." She reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Thank you, Trey. I'm glad you're here with me." The moment was interrupted by a distant, echoing roar that made them both jump. Cara's eyes widened in recognition and fear. "What was that?" Trey asked, instinctively reaching for the blaster that was no longer at his hip. "A shadow claw," Cara whispered, her voice tight with fear. "One of the most dangerous predators in the jungle. They usually hunt alone, but they're relentless once they've caught a scent." Trey moved to the cave entrance, peering out into the darkness. "How big are we talking?" "Larger than both of us combined," Cara replied, joining him at the entrance, "with claws that can slice through bark and bone alike." Another roar echoed through the night, closer this time. Trey's mind raced, assessing their options. "Can we outrun it?" Cara shook her head. "Not in the dark, and it would track us easily." "Great," Trey muttered. He scanned the cave, looking for anything they could use as a weapon. His eyes fell on a collection of loose rocks near the back. "Okay, I have an idea. It's not great, but it's all we've got." They worked quickly, gathering the largest rocks they could find and piling them near the entrance. Trey explained his plan as they worked. "We'll let it get close, then hit it with everything we've got. If we're lucky, we can drive it off, or at least buy enough time to make a run for it." Cara nodded, her face set with determination. It's risky, but you're right. We have no other choice. They didn't have to wait long. The creature's heavy footsteps soon became audible, accompanied by deep, rumbling growls. Trey and Cara pressed themselves against the cave walls on either side of the entrance, rocks at the ready. The Shadow Claw's massive form appeared at the mouth of the cave, its glowing yellow eyes scanning the interior. It was even more terrifying than Cara had described, a nightmarish fusion of feline and reptile, with scales interspersed with thick, dark fur. Its claws, as long as Trey's forearm, scraped against the stone as it began to enter. Now, Trey yelled. They launched their assault, hurling rock after rock at the beast. The Shadow Claw roared in pain and surprise, rearing back. For a moment, Trey thought their plan had worked, but then the creature's eyes narrowed. With a snarl of fury, it lunged forward. Trey dove to the side, narrowly avoiding a swipe of its massive claws. He rolled to his feet, grabbing another rock and hurling it at the Shadow Claw's head. The beast turned toward him, momentarily distracted from Cara. Run? Trey shouted to her. I'll keep it busy. But Cara didn't run. Instead, she grabbed a burning branch from their fire and thrust it at the Shadow Claw's face. The creature recoiled from the flames, giving them both an opening to dart past it and out of the cave. They raced through the dark jungle, the Shadow Claw's enraged roars spurring them on. Trey's heart pounded in his ears as he ran, branches whipping at his face and arms. He could hear the creature crashing through the undergrowth behind them, gaining ground with every step. Cara suddenly veered to the right. The thorn vines, she shouted. Trey followed her lead, bursting through a curtain of vines covered in wicked-looking thorns. The barbs tore at his clothes and skin, but he pushed through, emerging on the other side to find Cara already working to create a barrier. Together, they quickly wove the vines into a dense wall. Just as they finished, the Shadow Claw burst through the foliage behind them. It charged at the barrier, only to recoil with a pained howl as the thorns dug into its sensitive nose and paws. Trey and Cara didn't wait to see if the detour would hold. They took off running again, putting as much distance between themselves and the predator as possible. It wasn't until the sounds of the frustrated Shadow Claw faded completely that they finally slowed, collapsing against a large tree trunk. That, Trey panted, was too close. Cara nodded, equally breathless. You were very brave, Trey. Thank you for not leaving me behind. Trey managed a weak smile. Hey, I told you, we're in this together. He winced as he became aware of the numerous cuts and scratches covering his arms and face. Though I'm starting to think this planet has it out for me? Cara's expression softened with concern. She gently took his arm, examining the wounds. These need to be treated. The thorn vines can cause infection if left untended. She glanced around, her eyes searching the surrounding foliage. Stay here. I'll gather some healing herbs. As Cara disappeared into the undergrowth, Trey leaned back against the tree, trying to catch his breath and process the night's events. In just a few short days, his life had been completely upended. He'd gone from a lone smuggler to a fugitive on an alien world, allied with a woman who was rapidly becoming more than just a survival partner. Cara returned a few minutes later, her arms full of various leaves and flowers. She set to work, crushing some of the plants into a paste and applying it to Trey's wounds. Her touch was gentle, and Trey found himself relaxing, despite their precarious situation. So, he said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them, I'm guessing going back to my ship is out of the question? Cara shook her head, her fingers still working on his injuries. It would be the first place Zorn and his warriors would look for us. We need to find a safer haven, somewhere they wouldn't think to search. Trey nodded, wincing slightly as Cara applied the herbal paste to a particularly deep cut. Any ideas? Cara's hand stilled for a moment, her brow furrowing in thought. There is one place, the Temple of the Ancients. It lies deep in the heart of the jungle, in a region my people consider taboo. Taboo? Trey echoed, intrigued. Trey raised an eyebrow. Why is it said to be protected by spirit guardians? Cara explained. Many who have gone there never returned. But the legends also tell of a powerful force hidden within the temple, one that could potentially help us. Trey thought about it. On the one hand, a supposedly haunted temple didn't sound like the best option. On the other, they were quickly running out of alternatives. All right, he said finally. Haunted temple it is. How far? Several days' journey, Cara answered, finishing up tending to his wounds. Through some of the most dangerous parts of the jungle, Trey grinned, despite their dire situation. Well, we've already survived a crash landing, angry tribesmen, and a monster lizard thing. What's a few more deadly challenges between friends? Cara smiled at his optimism. Your spirit is admirable, Trey Gordon. I believe it will serve us well in the trials ahead. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the dense jungle canopy, they began their journey. Cara led the way, her vast knowledge of the jungle guiding them through treacherous paths. Trey was constantly amazed by her skill. The way she identified safe routes, found hidden water sources, and spotted edible plants he would have missed entirely. Their days followed a steady rhythm of cautious travel and vigilant nights. They took turns keeping watch while the others slept, always alert for any signs of danger. The deeper they went into the jungle, the denser the vegetation became, and the sounds of unfamiliar creatures echoed through the air. On the third day of their journey, as they carefully navigated a particularly swampy area, Trey's foot suddenly sank into what appeared to be solid ground. Before he could react, he was pulled under the thick, murky water, and it closed over his head. The last thing he heard was Cara's panicked voice before the world went silent beneath the water. Trey fought against the unseen force pulling him deeper. His lungs burned for air as he struggled to make his way back to the surface. Just when his vision began to fade, he felt a firm grip on his arm, pulling him upward. He broke the surface with a desperate gasp, coughing and sputtering. Cara's arms were around him, holding him afloat. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Trey nodded, still catching his breath. "Yeah, I'm fine. What the hell was that?" Cara helped him onto firmer ground, her eyes scanning the murky water. A lurker vine. They hide beneath the surface, waiting for prey to step into their grasp. Trey shuddered as he glanced down at his leg, still feeling the lingering grip of the plant. This place just keeps getting better and better. Despite his sarcasm, Trey was filled with gratitude for Cara. Without her quick thinking and knowledge, he might not have made it. As they continued their journey, both drenched from head to toe, Trey found himself looking at Cara with renewed admiration. That night, as they huddled around a small fire, Trey finally asked the question that had been on his mind. "Cara, why are you helping me? I mean, I know I helped you escape, but you could have easily left me behind by now. You'd probably be safer on your own." Cara sat in silence for a long time, her eyes fixed on the flickering flames. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but unwavering. "When I made my vow to tie my fate to yours, it wasn't just words, Trey. In my culture, such a promise is sacred. But more than that," she met his gaze. "You showed me kindness when you had no reason to. You risked your life for me. How could I do any less for you?" Trey felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "I can't thank you enough, Cara. I don't know what I would have done out here without you." She smiled, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "Then it's a good thing we found each other, isn't it?" The moment was interrupted by a distant sound, a rhythmic drumming that seemed to vibrate through the air. Cara tensed, her eyes widening in recognition. "War drums," she whispered. "Zoran must have gathered more warriors for the hunt." Trey felt a chill run down his spine. "How close are they?" "Too close," Cara replied, already moving to put out their fire. "We need to leave now." They quickly gathered their few belongings and set off into the night, the faint light of the planet's moons the only guide through the dense jungle. The sound of drums grew louder, pushing them to move faster, despite their fatigue. As they climbed a small rise, Cara suddenly pulled Trey down into a crouch. Through a gap in the trees, they could see the flickering lights of torches. A group of Sylvan warriors was making its way through the jungle, with the imposing figure of Zoran leading them. "They're between us and the temple," Cara whispered, worry lacing her voice. Trey's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. "Can we go around them?" Cara shook her head. "It would take too long. They'll reach the temple before we do." "Then we'll have to go through them," Trey said firmly. His eyes scanned their surroundings until they landed on a group of large, bulbous plants nearby. "What are those?" "Smoke bulbs," Cara replied. "They release thick, acrid smoke when ruptured. We use them for signaling, but they can also provide cover." A plan quickly formed in Trey's mind. All right, here's what we're going to do. Minutes later, they executed their plan. Trey and Cara carefully made their way down the slope, positioning themselves on either side of the warriors' path. At Trey's signal, they began throwing the smoke bulbs into the midst of the group. The result was immediate and chaotic. Thick gray smoke poured out, enveloping the warriors. Shouts of confusion and alarm filled the air as visibility dropped to almost nothing. Now! Trey shouted, and they sprinted forward, using the smoke to slip past the disoriented warriors. They ran faster than ever, knowing that every second counted. Behind them, they could hear Zoran's furious shouts as he tried to regroup his men. The sounds spurred them on, pushing them past exhaustion and fear. When they emerged from the smoke cloud, Trey risked a quick glance behind them through the dissipating haze. He caught sight of Zoran's enraged face. Their eyes met for a moment, and Trey saw the promise of relentless pursuit in Zoran's gaze. "Keep moving," Cara urged, pulling Trey's attention back to their flight. They pushed further into the jungle, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. The vegetation grew even denser, and the air became thick with moisture. Strange, glowing plants began to appear, casting an eerie light over their path. After what seemed like hours of running without stopping, they finally slowed down, their lungs burning and legs shaking from exhaustion. They found themselves in a small clearing, surrounded by towering trees with trunks wider than Trey's ship. "We should be safe here for now," Cara said breathlessly, leaning against one of the enormous trees. "These are guardian trees," she added. "My people. The beings here are considered sacred, and they won't venture near them." Trey fell to the ground, his chest heaving. "Good. That's good," he said between breaths. As his heart rate slowed, he surveyed their surroundings more carefully. The clearing felt almost otherworldly, with bioluminescent moss carpeting the ground and strange, glowing insects flitting through the air. "Where are we?" he asked, wonder in his voice. Cara's face was a mix of awe and concern. "We're entering the outer limits of the Whispering Wilds. The temple is at its core." Trey raised an eyebrow. "Whispering Wilds? That doesn't sound ominous at all." As if responding to his sarcasm, a soft, ethereal sound drifted through the clearing. It sounded almost like a voice, but not quite, a faint memory of a voice carried by the wind. Cara shivered. "The spirits are restless. We should rest while we can, but we must remain alert." They made camp for the night, taking turns keeping watch. Trey had trouble sleeping, his mind racing over the events of the last few days and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. When it was his turn to keep watch, he found himself observing Cara as she slept. Her face softened in rest, making her look younger and more vulnerable. A wave of protectiveness swept over him. He had known her for such a short time, yet already, he couldn't imagine facing this strange world without her. The depth of his feelings for her both excited and terrified him. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, casting a soft glow over the clearing, Cara stirred. She stretched as she sat up, and Trey quickly turned his gaze away, feeling as though he had been caught in the act. "Any trouble during the night?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. Trey shook his head. "All quiet." "Well, except for the creepy whispers." Cara nodded, her expression turning serious. "The whispers will only get louder as we near the temple. We must be cautious, not to let them lead us astray." After a quick breakfast of native fruits that Cara assured him were safe, they set off again. The jungle around them grew stranger with every step. The plants here were unlike anything Trey had ever seen. Some moved on their own, while others glowed or emitted strange sounds. Cara shared more of the temple's legend with him. The ancients were beings of pure energy who came to our world long ago. They built the temple as a place of immense power, but something went wrong. The stories aren't clear, but they tell of a catastrophe that forced the ancients to abandon the temple, leaving guardians to protect it. Trey listened closely, his instincts as a smuggler sharpening at the mention of great power. What kind of power are we talking about? Cara shrugged. The stories differ. Some say it's the power to control the elements, others say it allows travel between worlds, but all agree it's dangerous in the wrong hands. As they ventured deeper into the Whispering Wilds, the whispers grew more frequent and clearer. Trey strained to make out words, but found himself refocusing on the path ahead, noticing that Cara was doing the same, her brow furrowed in concentration. Suddenly, Cara stopped, her hand shooting out to halt Trey. "Wait," she whispered, her eyes scanning the area ahead. "Do you see that?" Trey followed her gaze. At first, all he saw was more strange plants and twisting vines. Then, his blood ran cold as he caught sight of something moving between the trees. A translucent humanoid figure, shimmering, floated in the air. It turned its blank face toward them and then disappeared. "What the hell was that?" Trey hissed, his hand instinctively reaching for a blaster that wasn't there. "A guardian spirit," Cara replied, her voice tense. "We're getting closer to the temple. Be careful. The guardians won't hesitate to lead us astray. Or worse." They proceeded with extreme caution, every sense heightened. The whispers grew louder, sometimes sounding as though they were right next to them. More ghostly figures flickered at the edges of their vision, always just out of reach. As they made their way through a dense patch of foliage, Trey suddenly heard a familiar voice calling his name. He spun around, his heart racing. "Did you hear that?" he asked Cara. She looked at him, confused. "Hear what?" The voice came again, louder this time. It was his mother's voice, and he was sure of it. "Mom!" he called out, taking a step toward the sound. Cara grabbed his arm, her grip firm. "Trey, no, it's not real. The spirits are trying to lure you away." Trey blinked, shaking his head as he tried to clear the fog. The voice faded, leaving him feeling disoriented and embarrassed. "Sorry," he muttered. "I thought I heard." "I know," Cara said softly, her hand still on his arm. "The spirits prey on our deepest desires and fears. We need to stay focused on each other and our goal." They continued, now holding hands to ensure they wouldn't be separated. The jungle around them seemed to shift, paths materializing and vanishing in the blink of an eye. More than once, Trey found himself tempted to take an easier-looking route, only to have Cara pull him back, insisting it was an illusion. As the day wore on, fatigue began to set in. The constant vigilance required to navigate the Whispering Wilds was taking its toll. Just as Trey was about to suggest they stop for a rest, the trees ahead parted, revealing a breathtaking sight. Before them stood an enormous structure, its architecture unlike anything Trey had ever seen. It seemed to be made of a material that shimmered and shifted, sometimes resembling stone, other times metal, or even pure energy. Intricate patterns adorned its surface, glowing with an inner light that pulsed in a hypnotic rhythm. "The Temple of the Ancients," Cara breathed, her eyes wide with awe. Trey let out a low whistle. It was an extraordinary sight as they approached the temple. The air seemed to thicken around them, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of Trey's neck stand on end. The whispers that had followed them through the jungle faded, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the ground beneath their feet. They arrived at the base of the temple, standing before a massive doorway that loomed over them. Strange symbols were carved into the frame, glowing with the same pulsing light that radiated from the rest of the structure. Trey tried to break the tension, his voice light despite the situation's gravity. "So, any ideas on how we get in?" Cara stepped forward, extending her hand toward the symbols. "The legends say there's a test," she replied. "Only those deemed worthy can enter the temple." As her fingers brushed against the glowing symbols, a surge of energy jolted through her body. She gasped, her back arching and her eyes widening in shock. Trey rushed forward to catch her as she stumbled back. "Cara, are you okay?" Trey asked, holding her steady. Blinking rapidly, she regained focus on his face. I'm fine," she said, her voice shaky. "I saw visions. The temple, it's alive somehow. It's searching our minds, our hearts." Before Trey could respond, a deep rumbling sound reverberated through the air. The massive door before them began to shift, intricate patterns rearranging like a giant puzzle. Slowly, the door swung open, revealing a dark passage that seemed to stretch endlessly into the heart of the temple. Trey helped Cara to her feet, both of them staring in awe at the now open doorway. "I guess we passed the test," Trey said, a nervous edge to his voice. Cara nodded, a mixture of excitement and apprehension on her face. "The temple has deemed us worthy to enter, but I fear this is only the beginning of our trials." As they stepped into the passage, the air grew noticeably cooler, filled with a faint shimmering mist. No sooner had they crossed the threshold than the door behind them slammed shut with a deafening boom, plunging them into near-complete darkness. Trey quickly fumbled through his pack and pulled out a small light he had salvaged from his ship. As its beam cut through the blackness, they saw that the walls of the passage were covered in the same shifting, glowing patterns as the exterior. The light seemed to react to their movements, pulsing brighter as they moved forward. "Stay close," Trey said, reaching for Cara's hand. She took it without hesitation, and he felt a comforting surge from the touch. They ventured deeper into the temple, the passage twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. Sometimes it felt like they were walking uphill, other times sideways, or even upside down. Trey's sense of direction was completely disoriented. After what seemed like hours, they finally emerged into a vast chamber. The ceiling arched high above them, lost in shadows. At the center of the room stood a raised platform, upon which rested a glowing orb about the size of Trey's head. "A heart of the ancients," Cara whispered in awe. "It's real." As they approached the platform, the orb's glow intensified. Trey could feel a powerful energy emanating from it, making his skin tingle. Suddenly, a voice boomed from all directions. "Who dares to seek the power of the ancients?" Trey and Cara exchanged a nervous glance. Gathering his courage, Trey stepped forward. "I'm Trey Gordon, and this is Cara. We've come seeking help." There was a brief silence before the voice spoke again. "Your minds have been examined, your hearts tested, but the final trial remains. Are you prepared to face the truth of yourselves and each other?" Before they could respond, the orb pulsed brightly, and Trey felt a strange sensation wash over him. The world around him began to blur and shift. He found himself reliving memories, his own and, strangely, Cara's. He saw himself as a child, watching his parents' ship disappear into the stars, leaving him behind. He felt Cara's isolation as she was cast out by her tribe. He relived his first successful smuggling run, the rush of outsmarting the authorities. He experienced Cara's wonder as she learned the healing arts from her tribe's elders. But it wasn't just memories he saw. Possible futures unfolded before him. He saw himself and Cara, older and battle-worn, leading a rebellion against oppressive forces. He saw them settling on a peaceful world, raising a family. He also saw darker futures, where they failed, or one of them didn't survive. Through it all, Trey became keenly aware of his growing feelings for Cara, the admiration, the trust, and the deepening love. He sensed her feelings for him, equally strong and complex. Suddenly, the vision ended. Trey found himself back in the chamber, gasping for breath. He turned to Cara and saw in her eyes that she had experienced the same thing. "Trey," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I saw everything." He nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. The voice spoke again, softer this time. "You have faced your truths. Your hearts are aligned, your intentions pure. The power of the ancients is now yours to wield. But remember, with great power comes great responsibility." The orb on the platform began to pulse rapidly, its light growing so intense it was almost painful to look at. Suddenly, it burst into a shower of glowing particles, swirling around Trey and Cara, enveloping them in a cocoon of light. Trey felt a surge of energy course through his body, unlike anything he had ever experienced. His mind expanded, filled with knowledge and understanding that seemed to come from the very fabric of the universe itself. As the light faded, Trey could feel Cara undergoing a similar transformation. Looking down at his hand, he noticed faint lines of energy pulsing beneath his skin. Turning to Cara, he gasped in awe at what he saw. She seemed to radiate with an inner glow, her eyes shimmering with an otherworldly light. "Cara," he whispered, "are you okay?" She nodded, a look of awe on her face. "I feel amazing, like I can see and understand things I never could before." She gently touched his arm. "And you? I can feel your thoughts, your emotions." Trey realized he could do the same. It felt like a barrier had been lifted between them, allowing their minds to connect on a deeper level. He could feel Cara's love for him, her resolve to protect their bond, and her excitement about what the future might hold. Before they could fully comprehend what had just occurred, a loud boom echoed through the temple. The walls trembled, and dust and debris fell from the ceiling. "What was that?" Trey asked, instinctively pulling Cara closer. Another, louder boom sounded. The voice of the temple rang out again, urgency in its tone. "Intruders are approaching. They seek to take the power for themselves. Protect the heart of the ancients." Trey and Cara exchanged a knowing glance. "Zoran," they said together. "We need to get out of here." Trey said, already calculating their next moves. With his newfound abilities, he could sense the layout of the temple and the quickest routes to escape. Cara shook her head. No, we can't let Zoran get his hands on this power. We need to stop him. Trey knew she was right. The thought of someone like Zoran wielding the power they had just gained was terrifying. All right, he said, squeezing her hand. Together, they made their way through the winding passages of the temple, their enhanced senses guiding them. As they neared the entrance, they heard the sounds of battle, clashing weapons, shouts of pain and anger. They burst into the entrance chamber and were met with chaos. Zoran and his warriors were locked in combat with the temple's spectral guardians. Energy blasts and ethereal weapons collided in a dazzling display of power. Zoran spotted them instantly, his eyes widening at the sight of their transformed forms. The power, he snarled. Give it to me. Trey stepped forward, feeling the surge of energy within him. Sorry, pal. Finders keepers, he said with a grin. With a thought, he shot a burst of pure energy at Zoran, knocking him off his feet. Cara joined him, using her new abilities to create a barrier between Zoran's men and the inner temple. The battle that followed was unlike anything Trey had ever experienced. He and Cara moved as one, their minds in sync, anticipating each other's moves. They wielded the power of the ancients with growing confidence, deflecting attacks and incapacitating their enemies. However, Zoran proved to be a formidable opponent. He appeared to have some form of protection against their energy attacks and pressed forward relentlessly. You don't deserve this power, Zoran snarled, swinging his weapon at Trey. You're an outsider, a nobody. Trey dodged the blow and countered with a blast of energy that Zoran barely deflected. Maybe? Trey retorted, but at least I'm not a power-hungry tyrant who can't accept change. As they fought, Trey could feel the temple reacting to the battle. The walls pulsed with increasing intensity, and the air crackled with energy. He realized that the longer the fight continued, the more unstable the temple became. Cara, he shouted, dodging another of Zoran's attacks. The temple can't take much more of this. We need to end this now. Cara nodded in understanding. Through their mental connection, they focused their energy, drawing on the power of the ancients. The air around them began to shimmer and warp. Zoran, sensing the rising energy, charged at them with a roar of defiance. But before he could reach them, Trey and Cara unleashed their combined energy in a massive shockwave that tore through the temple. The impact was immediate. Zoran and his warriors were thrown back, their weapons disintegrating in the face of the ancient power. The spectral guardians seemed to grow stronger, their forms solidifying as they corralled the stunned invaders. As the energy subsided, Trey and Cara found themselves face to face with Zoran, who was struggling to rise. His armor was in tatters. It's over, Zoran muttered weakly. Cara spoke, her voice resonating with an otherworldly authority. Your way is not the only way. It's time for change. Zoran looked at them with a mix of fear and awe. What are you? Trey stepped closer, placing a hand on Kara's shoulder. We're the future, he said simply. Your people don't have to live in fear of the outside world. There's so much more to discover, to learn, to explore. The fight drained from Zoran. He sank to his knees, defeated. Our ways have protected us for generations, he murmured. And they've served their purpose, Cara said softly. But now it's time to grow, to evolve. Will you help us lead our people into a new era? Zoran remained silent for a long moment, then slowly nodded. I will try. As the tension in the room eased, Trey sensed another presence. The voice of the temple spoke again, but this time it seemed to come from within both him and Cara. You have proven yourselves worthy, guardians, it said. The power of the ancients is now yours to wield wisely. Go forth and bring balance to your world and beyond. With those words, the temple began to shift and change. The walls seemed to melt away, revealing the jungle beyond. As they watched in awe, the entire structure began to sink into the ground, leaving behind only a small mound of vegetation. Trey turned to Cara, seeing the wonder mirrored in her eyes. So, he asked with a grin, what do we do now? Cara smiled, taking his hand. We build a better future, she said. People for your people, for everyone we can reach, Trey said, nodding as he felt a sense of purpose and excitement he had never experienced before. Sounds like quite an adventure. The greatest adventure of all, Cara agreed as they stood hand in hand. Trey realized his life had changed forever. No longer was he just a smuggler, no longer alone in the universe. With Cara by his side and the power of the ancients flowing through them, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The jungle around them seemed alive, as if the entire planet was awakening to the future's possibilities. Trey and Cara exchanged determined glances and moved forward, ready to begin their new journey together. As they walked, Trey chuckled softly. "You know," he said, "when I crashed on this planet, I never imagined it would end like this." Cara squeezed his hand and replied gently, "It's not an ending, Trey. It's just the beginning." With that, they set out into their new life, the power of the ancients resonating within them, and the promise of endless adventures stretching before them, like the boundless expanse of the cosmos. As they navigated their way through the whispering wilds, Trey and Cara found their new abilities made the journey easier. The spectral guardians, once hostile, now bowed in reverence as they passed. The haunting whispers had transformed into gentle encouragement, guiding them safely through the dense jungle. Zoran and his warriors followed, still in awe of what they had witnessed. The defeat had humbled them, and they looked at Trey and Cara with a mix of fear and respect. As they neared the edge of the whispering wilds, Cara suddenly stopped, her eyes wide. "Trey," she said with excitement in her voice, "I can sense my people. They're gathered just beyond the trees." Trey nodded, feeling it too. They must have felt the energy from the temple. "Are you ready for this?" Cara took a deep breath, squeezing Trey's hand. "As long as you're with me, I'm ready for anything." They stepped out of the jungle and found a large gathering of the Sylvan people, their faces filled with curiosity and apprehension. At the front stood an elderly woman, her white hair adorned with flowers, her eyes glowing with wisdom. "Grandmother Cara," she gasped, her voice thick with emotion. The old woman moved forward, her eyes shifting between Cara and Trey. "My child," she said softly, "you've returned to us, changed. The ancients have chosen you." Cara nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, grandmother, Trey and we've been given a great gift and a great responsibility." The elderly woman turned to study Trey, her gaze intense. "And you, outsider, you've become something more than you were. Do you understand the path that lies ahead?" Trey straightened, meeting her gaze firmly. "I'm beginning to," he said, "and I promise to use this power wisely to help Cara's people and others across the galaxy." The old woman smiled with approval. "Then let it be known," she declared, her voice carrying across the crowd, "that a new era has begun for our people. The ancients have spoken, and we must listen." A murmur of excitement and uncertainty rippled through the crowd. Zoran stepped forward, his head bowed. "Elder," he said, "I was wrong. I sought to preserve our ways at all costs, but I now see that change is necessary for our survival." The grandmother nodded, placing a hand on Zoran's shoulder. "Wisdom often comes at a great cost, Zoran, but you have learned, and that's what matters." As the sun set, casting a golden light over the jungle, Trey and Cara addressed the gathered Sylvan people. They spoke of the wonders they had seen, the power they now held, and the responsibility that came with it. They envisioned a future where the Sylvan people could engage with the broader galaxy while still maintaining their connection to their home world. The response was overwhelmingly positive. The Sylvan people, long isolated and fearful of change, found themselves inspired by the possibility of a new future. Night fell, and a celebration began. The Sylvan people sang and danced, their ancient traditions blending with newfound hope and possibilities. Trey found himself swept up in the festivities, marveling at the richness of Cara's culture. Later, as they sat together under the starry sky, Cara turned to Trey, her eyes glowing with the power of the ancients. "What do you think about staying here for a while?" she asked. "To help my people transition, to learn more about our abilities." Trey smiled, pulling her close. "I think that sounds perfect," he said. "But after that, the whole galaxy is waiting for us." Cara laughed, filled with joy and excitement. "One step at a time, Trey Gordon. We have all the time in the world." As they gazed at the stars, Trey felt a peace and purpose he'd never known. His life as a lone smuggler seemed like a distant memory now. Here, with Cara and the power of the ancients flowing through them, he felt like he was truly home for the first time in his life. The weeks that followed were filled with activity and change. Trey and Cara worked tirelessly to help the Sylvan people prepare for In their new roles within the galaxy, Trey and Cara took full advantage of the abilities granted to them by the power of the ancients. They dedicated themselves to healing the sick, improving agricultural yields to feed growing populations, and protecting the dense jungle from the more dangerous predatory creatures that roamed its depths. Trey, who had once been a lone smuggler wandering aimlessly through the stars, now found himself deeply immersed in the culture of the Sylvan people. He eagerly learned their language, customs, and traditions, growing fascinated by their profound and unbreakable connection to the natural world. The Sylvan, once a mysterious and secretive race, now trusted Trey as one of their own, and their understanding of nature was further enhanced by the powers they had all tapped into. As time passed, Trey was also struck by the many ways the Sylvan culture and their practices interwoven with the abilities of the ancients, and in return, the Sylvan people became increasingly curious about the vast, often strange, galaxy beyond their jungle world. They bombarded Trey with questions about the different planets he had visited, the various species he had encountered, and the astonishing events he had witnessed in his travels. Their thirst for knowledge about the wider galaxy was insatiable, and Trey, in turn, was eager to share everything he had learned throughout his journeys. During this time, Trey and Cara's connection deepened. Their bond, which was more than just a friendship, began to manifest in ways they had not expected. They discovered that their shared connection to the power of the ancients gave them an almost telepathic link. They could communicate across vast distances without speaking, simply through thoughts and emotions. This new ability extended beyond just communication. It allowed them to share vivid memories, emotions, and even their consciousness. Working together, they found that they could amplify each other's abilities, taking on complex challenges and solving problems with a unique, almost magical synergy. One evening, as they sat atop a high cliff overlooking the jungle, the setting sun casting a golden hue over the treetops below, Cara turned to Trey with a look of determination on her face. "I've been thinking about something," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "We should establish a school here, a place where we can teach others to use the power of the ancients responsibly." Trey looked at her with interest, considering her idea. "A sort of Jedi Academy, but for ancient power users?" he asked, his tone light but intrigued. Cara laughed softly, playfully swatting his arm. "Something like that," she replied with a grin. "We could bring people from all over the galaxy, teach them how to connect with the natural world, to use their powers for the greater good, not for selfish gain." "I like the sound of that," Trey said thoughtfully, his mind already racing with the possibilities. "We could create a new order of peacekeepers, mediators who could travel across the stars, helping to resolve conflicts, heal rifts, and protect the vulnerable from those who would abuse power." With their vision set, they quickly made plans, and with the blessing of the Sylvan elders, construction on a grand academy began deep within the jungle, hidden among the towering trees and thick foliage. Word spread rapidly across nearby star systems, and before long, beings from dozens of different species arrived on the planet, eager to learn. The academy became a hub of knowledge, and as it grew, so did the reputation of Trey and Cara. They became known as the Guardians, protectors of peace and balance in the galaxy. Their influence spread as they continued to mediate conflicts and teach others to use their powers for good. As the Academy flourished, Trey and Cara's role in the galaxy evolved even further. Their work took them to distant worlds where they helped resolve disputes between warring factions, healed emotional and physical rifts between species, and protected the weak and the oppressed from those who would use their power to dominate. Through these efforts, they became symbols of hope, of balance, and of peace. Their academy produced countless students who went on to spread the teachings of the ancients, creating ripples of change across the galaxy as they worked to foster understanding and unity among all species. The Sylvan people, once a small and insular culture, became respected and admired across the galaxy for their wisdom, their deep connection to the natural world, and their ability to guide others with the power of the ancients. What had once been a fearful and isolated race now stood among the most respected members of the galactic community. Their wisdom was sought after by leaders of many worlds who valued their insight into the balance of nature and the responsibilities that came with great power. One peaceful evening, after another successful day at the Academy, Trey and Cara stood on the balcony of the grand building, watching as the three moons rose over the jungle. The sight was breathtaking, the sky awash with the colors of twilight. Cara leaned into Trey's embrace, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you ever think back to that day when we first met?" she asked softly, her voice filled with nostalgia. "When you found me caught in your trap?" Trey chuckled at the memory, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "How could I forget?" he said. "I thought I was hallucinating, seeing a beautiful alien woman trapped in my snare. I couldn't believe my eyes." Cara smiled, intertwining her fingers with his, her heart swelling with affection. "And now look at us," she said. "Guardians of an ancient power, teachers of peace, protectors of the balance. It's incredible how far we've come." Trey kissed the top of her head, the warmth of her presence grounding him. "It really has been an amazing journey," he said, his voice filled with deep emotion. "And you know what? I wouldn't change a thing. Every challenge, every step along the way, it's led us here, to this moment." As they stood there, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight, Trey could feel the familiar surge of energy within him. The power of the ancients hummed inside them, a constant reminder of the responsibility they bore and the incredible journey they had undertaken. In that moment, Trey knew without a shadow of a doubt that this was where he was meant to be, here with Cara, surrounded by the lush, vibrant jungle of her homeworld, working side by side to make the galaxy a better place for all. This was his destiny. The man who had once been a lone smuggler, drifting through the stars without purpose, had been replaced by a man who had found love, purpose, and a connection to something greater than himself. His life, once aimless and fragmented, had become a story of growth, of discovery, and of love. As he held Cara close, he looked up at the vast, endless expanse of stars above them, feeling ready for whatever new adventures the universe had in store for them.